Hey everyone, welcome to another Locker Room Talk, the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
All right, Joe, today's Ash Wednesday. You can see I got the ashes on my forehead. And so I thought the perfect locker room talk you'd have for Ash Wednesday is which college basketball coaches, because we're in college basketball season's careers going up in flames, who's going to be ashes on the pavement, whatever school that they're at. And of course, our locker room talk is always brought to you by our fine sponsors, Hunter and Ginger Harrelson of Beach Ball Properties. Actually saw Hunter and Ginger on Saturday night. We went to a Mardi Gras ball with them. It was really good getting to see them. The weather was perfect this weekend for Mardi Gras, and I'm sure it's only getting a little bit warmer to be a good time to get that early spring vacay in with Hunter and Ginger. Maybe you're not able to swim yet, but you can definitely go out on the beach and feel good. If you want to go have a ball at the beach, give Beach Ball Properties a call.
I love warm weather and daylight savings time is always music to my ears.
That's right, Joe. What's not music to your ears or any of those in the Ole Miss faithful is what we're seeing on the basketball court right now. It's tough. I mean, you're seeing a lot of programs around the SEC that are not historically great basketball programs. Auburn, Tennessee, doing really good things. And Ole Miss, meanwhile, probably historically the worst basketball program in the SEC, has made a lot of facility upgrades. Of course, the last year you and I were there, they built the pavilion. When they brought in Kermit Davis, there was a lot of thoughts that this could be a really good thing. That he might look at what he did with Middle Tennessee State. Seems like the natural recruiting base would be there. Hopefully, he can go get Nashville kids and Memphis kids. And that's not the way it's working out. I mean, he's filling his roster with 2 and 3 stars. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the problems that Kermit Davis has been having with recruiting, Joe?
So it seems like there's been a lack of depth with a lot of his classes. I will give him credit. He's hit a home run with a couple of recruits. Like he's got, I think, 2 4-star recruits the last 2 years, respectively, like one each year. But you don't see the depth of the class. Like you said, you're getting a lot of 2 and 3-star guys that maybe weren't wanted by other, top programs as your rest of your class. And I think that hurts the depth. This year, obviously, he's going to argue that injuries have derailed their season, and that, is an issue. But he also came into the season, Dan, and said that Ole Miss had the deepest team in the conference, arguably. And so with the injuries, we've seen that that's probably not true because they've continued to lose games regardless. And so I say all that to say that when you look at the health of a program, a lot of times it's predicated on attendance and the atmosphere at the home games. And if you turn on an Ole Miss men's basketball game right now, I mean, the crowd is just very subdued. Everybody's completely checked out. There's just no stories to write anymore as far as interest. And everybody's focused on, football, spring practice and baseball season. And I think that just is a sign that, they're going to have to make some type of change or some type of new direction if they hold on to Davis.
That's right, Joe. And they need to definitely get more invigoration into the programs. You're right. Like right now, baseball has been so consistent for a long time. Kiffin definitely seems like he has things on the uprise. And basketball is sitting there as the weakest out of the top 3 sports, and it has been now for the last few years.
Yeah, and even their women's basketball team and their softball team are competing for the NCAA tournament. So, that it's pretty much only men's basketball that's this bad.
Well, Joe, let me ask you, in retrospect, do you think they maybe should have made a harder push for Penny Hardaway? I know it was going to be tough to get him away from Memphis, but I mean, if you could have gotten him, you would kill it in the Memphis recruiting department right now.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think we had talked about that 4 years ago when they hired Kermit Davis. And at the time, I thought that would have been just an outstanding hire. And I would liken it, to Lane Kiffin. You don't think he's going to stay at Ole Miss that long if you get Penny Hardaway. But, I mean, you date a supermodel, other people are going to start looking at you differently.
Exactly. I mean, when everything else is on the rise, maybe someone like a Penny Hardaway is going to take a harder look at a program that hasn't been a traditional power.
Yes, absolutely. And then just finally, I mean, just the facilities that we talked about. I mean, when you build the pavilion, there's just no excuse for not getting, better recruiting classes and quite frankly, just having better teams.
Well, absolutely, Joe. I mean, that's what happened at Auburn. So my senior year, they built the Auburn Arena. And I remember at that time thinking, this is really nice, but why are you building it? Because we're so bad at basketball. I don't think this is going to really do anything. And sure enough, it was 2 years later that they brought in Bruce Pearl, and it's been a slow, steady climb. But they showed the will and the interest and the investment on the front end, and that was part of the reason that Coach Pearl took the risk and came to Auburn.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what's a travesty for Ole Miss's standpoint is the 3 years prior to them building the pavilion when we were in law school, you look at the success that they had with Stephon Moody and Marshall Henderson going to the NCAA tournament twice in 3 years and winning a game, winning an SEC conference tournament title. I mean, they've been worse ever since, they built the pavilion. Like, really, their lean years have all been after building the pavilion, which is so ironic.
And that is strange because the Tad Pad was just such a dilapidated building and really kind of an eyesore. And it was weird they had better years there than what they had in the pavilion, which is a very nice arena. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's pretty cutting edge. And you're right. I mean, while we were in law school there, we had a lot of fun teams, especially with Marshall Henderson and then the end with Stephen Moody. And we just haven't really gotten anywhere even close to that since then.
Right. And it's just hard at this point, Dan, to run it back. What is going to be the presser to try to, make the fan base think there's momentum going into next season? Like, you either got to make a change or you've got to come out and say in a press conference that something's going to be different as far as the staff or something.
Yeah, there's got to be something you show some kind of renewed recruiting advantage. You're bringing a guy that's like a whiz at that. There's something that has to change because right now it is quite stale. And Joe, that'll kind of lead us into our next person who's also in the SEC. And this is one that shocks me because when this hire was made, I thought that instantly this was a program who they'd had some success back in the 80s. I think there was one time in the 90s they were pretty good, but this, for the most part, it's been kind of a disappointing program for what you think about them being in terms of how good they are and everything else. I'm talking about Georgia. You think Georgia would be a great basketball program. Of course, they can recruit Atlanta. Don't even have to go anywhere else. You have all the access to, any of the people in Georgia, people in Alabama, Florida. The recruiting is great there. And when they brought Tom Crean as a head coach, Indiana, of course, has been they're almost like the Nebraska of college basketball when you think about the football. Because, of course, when you and I were kids, Nebraska was the end-all be-all of football. They won national championships all the time. You feel like they even got kind of preferential treatment when they shouldn't have. And Indiana was like that when we were kids in basketball. Bobby Knight he was a legend. And Indiana basketball, that was probably the fan base that seemed to care the most about basketball. And they've really been in the doldrums for a long time. And the only brief period they've had since Bobby Knight retired where it seemed like things were back on track was when Tom Crean was there and he got them to a number 1 seed. And so when he took the Georgia job, I was like, this is a great hire. Crean's going to really tap into that Atlanta market. He's going to be able to get some guys that are probably from Orlando and some of the bigger cities and in Florida to come down there, probably go up to DC and get players. And I thought that was going to be an awesome hire. And he's been terrible, and it doesn't make any sense to me. And he's actually recruited pretty well. If you look at his rankings, I think he's had a couple top 10 recruiting classes, but he's just not doing anything with it.
Yes, and to that point, they had the number 1 pick in the NBA draft 2 years ago. Anthony Edwards played at Georgia, but no NCAA tournament appearance with Anthony Edwards. That defies logic. It's absolutely baffling. And you also add into Crean's previous resume, not only did he coach Indiana for some successful seasons, but he led Marquette to the Final Four. I mean, this is the guy that recruited Dwayne Wade into college basketball, and he can't win at Georgia. It just doesn't make any sense.
It's very strange, Joe. I mean, maybe Georgia's just a place where they just don't put a lot of emphasis on basketball, but you would say that, but then why would they go and hire Tom Crean? So it's just very strange to see what's happening right there. And that's not one that I would sit here that I would think would be talking about on my Up in Ashes locker room talk.
Yeah, but he's going to be gone. I think that they'll play, obviously, they're the last seed in the SEC, so they'll play next Wednesday night a game against the number 11 seed. So let's say that game starts at 6 o'clock. If it ends at 8:05, he'll pretty much be fired after that.
8:05 was Ashes time for Tom Crean.
It'd be the quickest announcement I think you've ever seen.
All right. Well, Joe, speaking of quick announcements, how about Patrick Ewing? Does he make it more than 2 minutes after his Big East tournament loss that he has. Because right now we are looking at a Georgetown Hoyas program. Yes, I said Georgetown, which I would say historically top 10, top 15 college basketball program. Winless, Joe. They got an offer in Big East play right now. Awful. And I mean, how do you explain this? After last year, they had kind of a rough season, but they came together, were able to win the Big East tournament title, and you and I were so excited. I mean, I think I had him going to the Sweet 16 because I was like, yeah, Patrick Ewing, Georgetown's, favored son, bringing him back. And then all of a sudden, now Georgetown has no wins in conference.
No, that doesn't make any sense either. I'd forgotten about them winning the Big East tournament title last year. Yeah, you thought that was going to kind of galvanize them and give them momentum under Ewing. But then this season, I'm just completely rendered speechless. I'd say that Ewing, he has a better chance due to his, ties to the program and just being a beloved former player and NBA legend. But, I mean, you're starting to feel like you got to make a change at some point, too, if you can't get it together. And if you're Georgetown in the Big East, you got to be upset with the fact, you see the likes of Providence clinching the Big East regular season title. That just can't happen if you're the history of Georgetown.
No, I mean, you think of Providence. Providence is a program that made one Final Four when Billy Donovan played for their team, not when he coached for their team. We're talking so long ago that Billy Donovan was coached by Rick Pitino. That's what we're looking at in terms of Providence being a real player in college basketball, and yet they're about to win the Big East. And meanwhile, Georgetown, who is one of the more formidable programs for most of our life, has really gone by the wayside. And it's a lot like Indiana. They had John Thompson Jr., who, of course, was their great coach, won a national championship, was Patrick Ewing's coach. Then his son comes in, and John Thompson III, he had a couple pretty good teams, but nowhere near the kind of success his dad had. And really, since John Thompson III, fell off the wayside, they've been pretty bad.
They haven't been the same, I think, since like 2013. Like, you're right. Like, they weren't even as good consistently under Thompson Jr. But they had some years with like Roy Hibbert and Jeff Green that they were good. But then I feel like after 2013, they had Otto Porter. They lost in the NCAA tournament. They were upset as a 2 seed against that Florida Gulf Coast team, Dunk City. And ever since that upset, the last 9 or 10 years, they haven't been the same program, I feel like.
And it's weird, Joe. I mean, I can tell you, like, now, like, we were in law school, friend of the show, Kent, he and I went to a Georgetown basketball game. We were on a trip to D.C. I thought it was the coolest thing. I was, like, so excited. I was like, we're in D.C. I want to watch a Georgetown basketball game. And now I think back, like, if they had been as bad the last 7 or 8 years as they have been now, I probably wouldn't even think about that when I'm in DC. I probably would be like, oh, I want to go watch a Capitals game or a Nationals game or something. I wouldn't be thinking Georgetown Hoyas is my first thought. But when I was there at that time, the first thing I wanted to see was Georgetown playing Butler. That seemed like a really interesting game to me.
Oh, for sure. Like, you don't have any household name players right now there. Like, I talked about NBA players that played there before. Allen Iverson, obviously, Patrick Ewing. I mean, you just don't have like the national public, would outside of Big East would have a hard time naming a Georgetown player over the last 5 years.
Right. When, it used to be every year you had somebody at Georgetown that was probably a top 20 player in America.
Exactly.
So we'll see. I mean, Patrick Ewing definitely has more benefits, kind of like Juwan Howard does, than anyone else has. And in fact, he probably has even more benefits than Juwan Howard, because Patrick Ewing is on the only Georgetown team to actually win the championship. There's a lot of credence there, but man, going unwin, going over in your conference, I don't care who you are. If you're Nick Saban, it doesn't do a lot of good for you,
Yeah, I mean, that's the conference that I think still includes DePaul. I mean, you can't even – they're always the worst team. Like, you got to do better than that, at least.
Yeah, I don't even know how DePaul, like, stays in that conference. It's like they keep them in there just so they can keep beating them.
They've had 0-18 seasons, I think, in the regular season, DePaul has.
Yeah, that's a rough basketball program. They even lost to them. All right, Joe, sticking in the SEC, here's one that I also really wouldn't have thought about, especially when you think about 5 years ago. He had this program, which has never been good at basketball, in the Final Four. We're talking about Frank Martin. Of course, this is one I was shocked that he left Kansas State to go to South Carolina to begin with. I thought Kansas State was a better basketball job. And then he kind of surprises us in like his second year, making the Final Four. And I was like, all right, Frank Martin, you're just that good of a coach that I guess you can do it anywhere. And since then, he hasn't even made the NCAA tournament, Joe.
Yeah, the problem with them is that they have not had great regular seasons. And he had that one Final Four run, but just not a whole lot of consistency. But if you're South Carolina, your tradition outside of that is basically just 2 NIT championships in the early 2000s. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, can you do better? I think you and I both think the answer is it'd be hard to do better than Frank Martin. But at the same time, you feel like there is a little bit of a push to part ways with him due to the fact that they haven't been, I think everybody thought once they made it to the Final Four, I think South Carolina fans were hoping that was the start of, more consistency. And I guess that to get to that point and not make the tournament sense, I think that's maybe where the frustration is.
Yeah, I think that's got to be a lot of it because, you got to think if you're South Carolina, well, we've never made it this far. We got to give this guy a lot of years. But now that you've tasted that success, it's hard to be so far away from it than the 5-6 years since then.
Yeah, it'd be different if he was having early exits in the first round every year, but this is not even making the tournament. I think that's the issue, maybe.
I think that's the death knell. I think that Georgia and South Carolina ought to do a bait and switch. Just send Frank Martin down to Georgia, send Tom Crean up to South Carolina. I think Frank Martin would do pretty awesome at Georgia, especially with his ability to recruit that close by. Maybe Tom Crean gets a new scenery, maybe with a little less expectations. Maybe he could do some good things.
Yeah, both of them are, ironically, about the best candidate for each other's program, which is interesting.
Yeah. All right, Joe, the last one we got in the SEC, and this is one that, yet again, this was a hot name, pun intended with our Ashes comment, a few years ago, but now he's suddenly going up in flames. That's Quanzo Martin in Missouri. Of course, Quanzo did a really good job filling in for Bruce Pearl at Tennessee. Suddenly did a really good job there, took them to the Sweet 16. He was a real hot name, and he comes to Missouri, and he's had the number 1 overall draft pick. But he hasn't had a lot of success when Missouri's been a place that you think about it. They used to routinely make it the Sweet 16, Elite 8 all the time when they were back in the Big 12. In the beginning of being in the SEC, I thought that Mike Anderson had doing a really good job with Missouri before he went back home to Arkansas. And since then, Missouri has become one of the worser programs in the SEC, and Quanzo Martin's done nothing to change that.
Right. And I looked at something about Quanzo Martin today because I was reading that the Celtics, one of their players, Jaylen Brown, got injured last night. That made me start looking at his college career. And he played college basketball at California for Quanzo Martin when he was there for 2 or 3 years. This is in between his stint with Tennessee and Missouri. And I was looking at the team that Quanzo Martin had in 2015, 2016 with Jaylen Brown. And I was looking at that roster and I was like, this team should have been a Sweet 16, if not an Elite 8 team. And they lost in the first round to Hawaii. And I was looking back at Quanzo Martin's tenure also at Missouri. And he's had a lot of just one and dones in the NCAA tournament with talented teams. And I think the only time he's ever had any success in the tournament is when he was with Tennessee. As last year, they made a surprise run to the Sweet 16 as an 11 seed. And
that's
so
right. They played in the playing game.
Yes, exactly. And so that all kind of leads me to believe that, Quanzo Martin may be somewhat of an overrated coach, and he's just not getting it done in the tournament, despite the fact that he's recruited at a very high level. And so I think Missouri, they desperately want to do better because, like you said, with Mike Anderson, they know they can do better.
Yeah, you think about it, they had Mike Anderson. They had that guy, Snyder, for so long. Do you remember him? Snyder, that was the Missouri coach. He was there for a long time. I think he left them to become the Memphis coach, actually.
Yeah, and then they also had in between Martin and I guess Kim English, who was there kind of as a placeholder for a couple of years. They had Frank Haith, the former Miami coach, but all he did was win 1 or 2 years with Mike Anderson's recruits, and then he was bad after that. And I think he got them in trouble, like on probation or something.
Yeah. So, Joe, maybe for what Ole Miss experienced with Andy Kennedy, we could have another bait switch. And they can just take Quanzo Martin, and we can give them Kermit Davis, and maybe that's more middle of America. Maybe you can do a little bit better with Missouri, because you're right. Quanzo Martin is a guy that gets a lot of hype. He tends to have really good regular seasons, but yeah, I mean, you're right. He never makes deep runs in the tournament except for that one time with Tennessee.
Yeah, and he can recruit at a high level too. Like I talk about Jalen Brown. He got Michael Porter Jr., the top recruit at Missouri his first season. And so, I mean, that would be great for Ole Miss to step it up in recruiting. Kermit Davis, yeah, he definitely, needs a change of scenery as well.
That's right. So here we go, guys. We gave all these SEC programs the keys to the castle, just baits and switches. Come on. We make the conference better all around. It's just good. It's just like Biden was talking about in the State of the Union, right? We're trying to be more global. And Joe and I care about the conference. We're trying to make everybody better. You can just do a couple switches and everything works out right.
Absolutely.
All right. And speaking of switches, switch on our show. You can switch it on YouTube. This will be posted up there soon. You can also listen to all of our episodes on Spotify. YouTube's only the last couple of months, but Spotify's got our entire catalog of the last couple of years. You can listen to the podcast there. And of course, you can see all of our fun tweets on Twitter. You follow us at DJ Sports Show and like our Facebook fan page. And as always, I'm Dan.
I'm Joe.